Well, I had a dream the other night. It was a strange dream. I dreamed I died. And then suddenly, I was standing at the gates of heaven before a man who looked at me and said, "My name's St. Peter. Who are you?" I told him, "I'm Kevin Kissel." St. Peter looked down at the large book in front of him, started flipping through the pages. He said this was the book of life. And after a couple minutes, he looked back up, had an odd look on his face, and asked again, "Who are you? What's your name?" I said, "I'm Kevin Kissel." He said, "Well, that's funny. You're not supposed to be here." Didn't sound too funny to me considering the alternative. So I asked him to please take another look, and I added that my middle name is Mark, if that's going to help any. St. Peter shrugged. He took another look, then shook his head and said, "I was definitely not supposed to be there." What? I thought. I broke out in a nervous sweat after that. But he continued talking. There's only one thing I can do, he said. I'm going to have to send you back because it's not your time. Whew. I was relieved. Not my time, not the wrong place, just the wrong time. Took a deep breath as he finished. "Kevin, I'm going to send you back, and we're going to send you to Nederland, Texas, because that's as close to heaven as you're going to get right now." As one of the newest residents of this community, I may be asking many of you the same question St. Peter asked me. Who are you? For the next few months, as I try to put your faces together with your names, I'll be wondering, who are you? What's your name again? And so I ask for your patience with me on that account. I imagine Karen and I will both be asking a lot of questions as we get settled into our new home here. This morning, I'd like you to think about who you are. Who are you? Have you spent much time thinking about that lately? For some people, that's a real simple question. For some people, it's a little more difficult. It goes far beyond just knowing your name, what school you go to, some title you've earned, your occupation. The answer I get when I ask myself that question today is different than it was a decade ago. It changes through time. It's still changing. Now as I learn and grow and get closer to God, strengthen my faith. I remember when I was 7 years old, thinking one day, wondering who I was a little bit, thinking about that as I stood in front of the red brick house my family lived in. I was staring at the black metal mailbox that was on the front of the house and reading my father's name on it, Reverend Jack Kissel. At that age, for some reason, I thought I had to do what my father did for a living. And I didn't like that. I didn't want to be a pastor, not at all. One of the biggest reasons for my thoughts about it at that point in time, at that young age, was I just didn't like the way that sounded. Reverend Kevin Kissel, Reverend Kevin, it just sounded too weird. As the years passed, I continued to have thoughts about becoming a pastor go through my mind from time to time, but I still didn't like it. I knew it wasn't for me. I was too shy, too introverted, couldn't stand the thought of getting up in front of people and talking. Plus, I did not want to move every few years. I dreamed of growing up, getting a house with a white picket fence around it, getting a job, living in that town, raising my kids in that town, in that house, have my grandkids all around me, staying in one place forever. So I did not want to be a pastor. I hated moving when I was a kid. But God's plans for me were different from my own plans. And God, with his sense of humor, reminded me of that during my high school years when a few of my friends started calling me Rev Kev one day out of the clear blue. I still don't know why they did that. A few years later, I went off to college to study math and science. I remember telling God that I'd rather get a regular job, whatever that is, and make lots of money. Of course, you can't fault me for that. And then give my money to the church to support the pastor. I just didn't want to do that kind of work. After another few years, I was working as a meteorologist in the Air Force. And I loved my job. That whole idea of not moving wasn't working out so well in the Air Force. You move a lot. But I loved what I was doing, especially when I was transferred to Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu, Hawaii. That was beautiful. 3 beautiful years out there. On Sundays, I attended worship at the base chapel. It was a real nice place. I taught second grade Sunday school, worked one day a month downtown at a homeless shelter for the folks in Honolulu. And life was great. My kids really loved it out there, what they can remember of it, because they were young. One day, when my eyes were drawn to the beautiful mountains on Oahu, God got my attention in a way he never had before. He spoke to me very simply, very clearly, very firmly. Kevin, you're working full-time for what you want to do and only part-time for me. I want all that to change. All I'm getting is the time you have left over. It's time for you to work full-time for me and do what you want to do with the time you have left over. At that moment, for the very first time, I was truly convinced God wanted me to be a pastor. I couldn't deny it anymore. Within 15 months, I was living in Texas, serving as a student pastor in a town a little bit outside of Tyler, and registered to begin classes at Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University. Seminary taught me a lot about God. And the wonderful thing about that is the more I learned about God, the more I learned about myself. And it's still that way today. The more I read the Bible, the more I pray, the more I get to know the wonderful creator of this beautiful universe that we live in, the more I learn about myself, and the better life becomes. Life doesn't get easier, but it makes more sense. And it's absolutely better. You know, that's exactly the way it worked for Moses. Moses, as many of you know, was an Israelite, born into slavery in Egypt. But while he was an infant, Pharaoh's daughter found him floating in a basket on the Nile River. So she took him in to her home. He was raised in one of Pharaoh's beautiful, luxurious palaces. He was educated and trained. He lived a life of privilege. But at some point, Moses found out he wasn't born into this royal family. He was an Israelite. That's when he felt compelled to leave the palace to discover more about who he truly was, about his background. He wanted to spend some time with his own people. And he discovered they were suffering as slaves in a way he didn't realize from the windows of the palace. And he was bothered by that. He was angry about the pain and misery his people experienced, and he felt guilty about the life that he was living. One day, he absolutely lost it when he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Israelites, a slave, and he killed the Egyptian. In no time at all, word got out. It spread quickly. Moses fled for his life. He ran off to Midian, where he met a young lady. They got married, and he went to work for his father-in-law, tending his father-in-law's sheep. And this is where our Bible reading will begin for today. I'll be reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. I invite you to stand as you're able for our Bible reading. That's Exodus, chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law, Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was too afraid to look at God. This is the word of the Lord. Please be seated. I imagine Moses, as he tended these sheep, had plenty of time to think about who he was, and who he thought he was a shepherd. And at the time, he was right. Until the day God drew his attention to an amazing view on that mountain. Moses saw a bush. It was engulfed in flames. It was blazing with flames, but it was not burning up. So the Bible tells us he decided to check it out, to go take a look. When God saw him coming, God spoke to him very simply, very clearly, very firmly. God said, "I've seen the suffering and misery of my people. I've seen their oppression at the hands of the Egyptians. I've heard their cries, I've seen their pain, and I've come down to stop it, to rescue them. So get going. Yeah, that's right, I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of slavery, to freedom in a new land, a beautiful land, a land of their own, a land flowing with milk and honey." That was about the last thing Moses expected. "I'm sending you to Pharaoh." So he asked, "Who am I? Who am I to go to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt?" God answered, "Don't worry. I'll be with you. I'll display my power through you. You don't have anything to fear. Just go." Well, Moses was completely, totally filled with nothing but fear. He was terrified. So he started making excuses. He said he couldn't speak very well. Maybe even said he had a fear of speaking in public. I don't know. And even if he could, he said, "I don't think the Israelite people will listen to me, and Pharaoh surely is not going to listen to me." Well, when God promised to take care of that for him, Moses came up with another excuse, and then another. He went back and forth with God until God finally made it clear there was no denying God's will for his life anymore. That's when Moses finally went to Egypt. He led his people out of there, led them through the wilderness for 40 years. And all along the way, he listened to and followed God. And he learned more and more about God with each passing day. He learned God was true to his word. He learned about God's incredible, never-ending love. He learned about God's power. He saw it with his own eyes. He experienced it. And amazingly, the more Moses learned about God, the more he learned about himself. Moses realized he was much, much more than a common everyday shepherd of sheep. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that isn't who he was. And he began to learn that when he trusted God enough to follow him, God could work through him to do some amazing and powerful things. The plagues, the water, the food in the wilderness, 40 years worth, the Ten Commandments, the structure God provided for life, and on and on. Moses wasn't who he thought he was. He's now remembered as a great leader, the greatest prophet in the history of Israel. Through Moses, God actually changed the course of history for the world. And that brings me back to you. Who are you? Do you really know Some of you, maybe many of you, turned toward God years ago and you're doing exactly what God would have you do with your life. And that's great. That's wonderful. But some of you, I don't know how many, some of you don't really know who you are. Some of you have an idea, but you may not be quite ready to commit yet to God's way. And some of you are still committed to your own way, doing your own thing your own way, not letting loose. Well, for your own good, for your own peace of mind, for your own sanity, it's time to let go of all of that. Time to stop making excuses. Don't sell yourself short anymore. The next time God gets your attention, be sure to check it out. Listen to what he has to say. Follow. Because you'll get to know God better than you know God now. God knows who you truly are. And he's just waiting to reveal it to you. Amen.